Welcome back to the channel. This is Robert at Retro Car Guy 530. In this video I'm going to show you the steps necessary to replace the ignition switch in a Chevrolet SSR pickup. Now the steps are very similar to the video that I produced for the turn signal switch noise reduction, so I'll put a link in this video to that one so you can see all the tools and the steps necessary to gain access to the steering column. Except you don't really need to remove the top panel from the steering column for the ignition switch, but the basic idea is documented in that video, so take a look at that one and then you can come back to this one and finish it out. After the intro here, we'll go through why you might want to replace the ignition switch on a preventative basis, and if you're having an electrical problem, and some of the cautionary things you need to pay attention to while replacing it. So let's get to work. Please review the automotive information, repair, and modification guidelines on this screen. Seek the advice of a repair professional if you're unsure how to perform any repair or modification safely and correctly. All repairs and modifications are performed at your own risk. There are a couple electrical system and SSR precautions I would advise you of. Before you work on any electrical component, I would suggest disconnecting the negative battery cable. But in the case of the SSR, I would also suggest prior to doing that, you also lower both side windows, since disconnecting the negative battery cable will prevent the indexing of the windows when you open and close the door, so you don't want to force the window through the door seals on both sides. So lower the windows before you disconnect the battery cable and you're ready to start. So here are the old and new versions of the ignition switch. You can definitely tell the original style installed at the factory by the fact that the ignition switch is black on all plastic covers on the ignition switch. Of course you have the white pins here and the white gear, but the main covers are all black. In the newer AC Delco, in theory revised part, the cover here is gray, so you can definitely see the difference there. The theory is this is an updated switch from AC Delco that includes some sort of improvement on the electrical connectors inside that help prevent the loss of connectivity over time, corrosion. I've seen some pretty nasty looking switches that have been opened up after a bunch of usage or a number of years, and that's the main problem with the ignition switch so far, that corrosion will set in on the contacts in there, and the electrical voltage that goes through, power going through the switch just isn't up to the levels necessary for some of the computer systems in the vehicle, which will then cause some random bizarre electrical behaviors in the vehicle. So is this the root cause of everything that goes wrong with the vehicle? I would say no, but it's certainly one of the cheaper and easier things to swap out to see if it's participating in the problem. In fact, some people have recommended to replace the ignition switch on a regular preventative maintenance basis, such as when you replace your battery, maybe you switch the ignition switch at that point. Changing two things at once maybe, you won't know which one's at fault if something goes wrong, so you could do that, or you might pick a particular time just to replace the ignition switch so you know if, when you change it, if something goes wrong after that, it's likely the ignition switch. But it's certainly worth replacing on a regular basis just to make sure you don't have that same corrosion problem showing up on your switch. And I've seen failures of the newer style switch as well. It doesn't mean that it must be improved in some way, because I've seen probably less of them fail, but I've seen new versions of this, like any part, they can fail quickly as well. So I don't have an opinion one way or the other, they're supposed to be improved. So I'll go with that theory until proven otherwise, but I've still seen failures with this one as well. And some SSR owners carry a spare one of these or a spare couple of these if they go on a long trip, because it's one of those things that you don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere and not able to get the ignition switch when that's the root cause of your problem that's going on. So keep that in mind. You might want to carry a spare in your vehicle as well. So with the visual difference, you can see, of course, by color, there's a slight difference on this particular set of them, because when I went to remove this one, this J connector, let me get this in view here for you. See, this J connector is there on the new switch, and there's a little wiring harness that goes through that section of this switch that you need to use a J connector to hold in a proper position. But this one was already broken on mine when I went to replace it, so I didn't cause that one, but I did cause a situation because I got a bit too aggressive with the connector removal for the main wiring harness. It was quite difficult to get it out of the ignition switch. So if your switch has never been replaced, the connectors might be very tight, and getting this whole thing assembly out might be difficult, because it's somewhat difficult getting this little pin, or lock pin here for the connector pushed down, because there's a lot of, it's thick plastic back there. You can push it down, but then getting everything pulled out is just kind of a jumble of things to try to do at once. Plus you've got the wire connectors also resisting a bit. So one approach I've seen that works fairly well is using a flat blade screwdriver, and there's a little recess in the connector here where the plastic pin that holds the electrical connector in. You don't want to get too aggressive with it, but you want to press on this tab to press it down a little bit. Go down this slot here and feel for that initial recess there, and just pop it out like that. And you can see now that I was putting the screwdriver basically right here, and then using the plastic on the outside of the ignition switch to help pop it out. So be gentle with that. Do not pull on the wires, because the connectors might be, you might loosen the wires from the connectors. It's never good to pull on wires on anything. So if you can remove it by removing the connector out of the switch, that's fine. You can break the plastic on the switch if you need to. Just preserve the wiring harness as best as possible. And when it goes into the new switch, of course, it just simply pops in there. But make sure all the connectors are fully seated. That no one else pulled on the wires and partially pulled them out, because that could be part of your problem as well. If someone prior to you was inappropriately trying to pull this out and move them out of the connectors, because these plastic pins are there to help keep those connectors in place. But if they, like I said, if they got too aggressive, it could be part of the issue. So removing the switch, there's a place I'll show in the video later on where on the steering column, this one's quite obvious. You need to push in to push this spring-loaded pin backwards to allow that side to drop. And there's a corresponding one over here, but there's a white plastic piece on the steering column area to hold something else there. You just need to be able to push in on that one as well. So you need to push these a little bit and pull down on the ignition switch a little bit, and then it should just pull straight out of the channel that it slides into. The next issue comes with the installation of the switch. Of course, the biggest problem is that people will pull the switch out, put everything back together and just pop it up into the slot for the ignition switch, and it's not aligned properly. So a little bit later in the video, I'll show you how I use some painter's tape to mark the normal positions for the ignition switch. The off position, which is normally at the seam between the top and bottom panels, and then the accessory position, the run or on position, and then the full start position. And that corresponds to a variety of positions on the switch. So I've seen some videos that will say, well, just move this a little bit and that should correspond to off, and then put it back up in there. But that's kind of a guess. So I would recommend, there are fixed positions for accessory and on. So let's go, there's one click, that's accessory. Next click is the on or run position. If you try to go past that, you actually get the spring-loaded start position. So I would put it into the on position, and because you've already disconnected your battery, negative battery cable before starting any electrical work on your vehicle, as you should normally do, the run position is fine, and that way when you have the wiring harness connected, it shouldn't be a problem reconnecting anything because you don't have the battery connected. So place it into the run position or on position, and then put the key lock assembly into that same position. So when you insert this into the steering column, it's in a known position on both of them, and make sure that you align them that way. So when you go to the various positions, it should just go through the original positions you've marked on the tape. And then the secondary check of that is after you've got it installed and the battery cable's been reconnected, you would go through each of the positions to make sure that when you turn it to accessory, that the accessories come on. You turn it to the on position, it's still in the correct position, and you go to start it, it actually starts. Because if these are off by a pin or so, sometimes you'll go to start and it won't you'll do the spring loaded and nothing will start because you haven't aligned this properly. And the other side of this is when you've installed this incorrectly, you'll go to the off position, but if you look on the instrument panel, the battery charge system light is on, still in the off position, and that's the biggest cause for battery drain after an ignition switch replacement is the incorrect alignment of this gear, and the accessory position can be left on without knowing it. So that's the visual indicator I'll show you later in the video on the instrument panel. So aligning the gear is a very important part of this, but that's the big cautionary items for it is, getting this aligned correctly, removing the connector from the original switch without damaging the connector itself on this part of it. And if you follow those simple cautions, getting it reinstalled and aligned correctly, you should have a new AC Delco ignition switch installed that hopefully is error-free.
Here are some final checks and steps to go through after you've completed this procedure. Confirm that all ignition switch positions are functional as expected and aligned per the tape that you placed on the steering column. Confirm that the start position actually works. Confirm that the instrument panel charging system light is off when the ignition switch is in the off position. This helps confirm that you've got the gearing aligned correctly for the ignition switch. Make sure that the small wiring harness on the passenger side towards the dashboard is in the J-hook. Replace the zip tie that was removed on the left side of the steering column that gave you extra slack in the wiring harness to perform this procedure. Verify the ignition switch wiring harness connector is snapped into place fully, and just to make sure nothing will pull it out and it's in its proper position. Reinstall all other steering column covers and dashboard items, which can be viewed in the other SSR turn signal switch noise reduction video. And as a final couple of steps, since you've disconnected the battery cable, you may need and very likely will need to re-index the SSR side windows to make sure that they index correctly when you open and close the doors. And your radio may need to have the time and its radio favorites reset. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you're stopping by the channel for the first time and you want to, please subscribe. Click that bell icon to get notified when I upload new videos. Please follow Retro Car Guy 530 on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for taking the time to visit the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.